The Matrix changed my life, and then over these years,
Keanu Reeves, who is 60 years old, just made an unprecedented statement on The Matrix. He kept quiet for a long time, but now he's speaking up. One heartfelt interview was the beginning. "I can't tell you how many individuals I've met whose lives have been positively impacted by The Matrix. It's top-notch." Why is he now speaking up now? And what was so hazardous that it needed to be kept hidden for more than 20 years? Something deeper, something he was never meant to disclose, is at play here, and it's not your average behind-the-scenes tale. If you think you know The Matrix, you might need to reconsider after what Keanu recently revealed. The actor who was first hesitant to star in The Matrix became the one who grasped the disturbing meaning of Keanu's eerie comments. Starting from the beginning is where we need to take this narrative. Keanu Reeves has always been candid about his lack of interest in pursuing stardom. He became famous in the late 1990s for his appearances in films including Point Break, Speed, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He preferred to elude Hollywood scrutiny by vanishing into offbeat independent flicks or Shakespearean productions. So it wasn't a certain conclusion that he would accept the script for The Matrix. Actually, he was confused about it initially. What the Wachowskis had penned seemed less like an action film and more like a philosophical thesis. It was unusual for a blockbuster to have lines about virtual reality, power, and escaping the illusion of existence. Nicolas Cage declined because he didn't want to leave his family, while Will Smith infamously turned it down for Wild Wild West. Most celebrities passed on it. The studio had doubts about its viability, and certainly wasn't banking on Keanu to lead the charge. I don't know what it was about the script, but he couldn't escape the idea that it spoke something no one else in Hollywood dared to express. Perhaps it was the challenge, the mystery, or something else entirely. It was important, even though he didn't understand anything at first. He registered. A 4-month martial arts boot camp, complete with choreography, wire work, and physical discipline, followed. It was one of the most rigorous training programs of his career. Indulging fully, Keanu did it. He sacrificed a portion of his income to ensure that the crew could remain employed during the production's budget crunch. From the start, it was simply Keanu. It wasn't a marketing gimmick. He wasn't enacting the role of Neo in the conventional sense. His performance is subdued, even hesitant. Not even Neo swaggers or screams. Like Keanu, he listens, has doubts, and grows during the course of the performance. Instead of pretending to be one of the selected, he was just attempting to understand what it meant to be chosen. The crew and actors noticed his serious demeanor behind the scenes. He would go deeply into the screenplay, questioning not only the action sequences, but also the concepts presented, such as what is reality? If free will is a mirage, how can we be sure we have it? The purpose is lost. What set him apart from every other actor was his ability to give life to what were essentially plot points rather than just lines. Keanu saw The Matrix as a warning, a reflection, and something personal, whereas the studio regarded it as a high-concept action picture with spectacular effects. His goal was not to become the spokesperson for a franchise that would define a generation. The moment the film became an international sensation, he really took a step back. Keanu hit off on his motorcycle, sought out peace and quiet, and worked on little projects when others may have made a killing off of his stardom. For as long as he could remember, he didn't give a hoot about becoming the face of a billion-dollar film. Keanu still doesn't brag when asked about The Matrix. Instead, he credits the Wachowskis, the crew, and the chemistry of the ensemble for making the film a reality. On the other hand, every admirer is aware that he was crucial to its success. Neo was always intended to be mysterious, open, and inquisitive, not showy. Not only was Keanu Reeves the ideal candidate, but he was the only one, not because he had an immediate faith in The Matrix, but because he gradually allowed it to trust in him. A cautionary tale, The Matrix was more than simply a film. Black leather, kung fu, bullet time, and spectacular effects encased in a computer-generated shell made The Matrix appear like any other science fiction action film. But behind it all, there was a a coded, subtle alarm bell. Those involved with the film said that the message nearly didn't make it to theaters. Philosophical inquiry into the nature of reality has always captivated the Wachowskis. The concept of machines destroying humanity was only a delivery mechanism in the original screenplay. What they truly meant was even more unsettling. We're already incarcerated, and the bars are invisible to us. The work of philosophers like Jean Baudrillard, who discussed the concept of hyperreality, a reality in which humans primarily inhabit virtual environments, served as an influence. Simulacra and Simulation, his book, was not only made into a script, but was also mandatory reading on set. Neo uses a torn page from that book to conceal his illicit program. It was more than simply ingenious stage design. It was a hint. The studio, however, was not a fan. They desired a blockbuster. They desired action. They were apprehensive about delving too deeply into the abstract, even if they acknowledged the superficial technological attraction. The Wachowskis encountered increasing resistance as the film delved more into challenging notions of control, surveillance, and choice. Leaning in, though, was Keanu. He became a silent advocate for the film's merits, both in terms of style and substance. He spoke more about awakening, freedom, and the possibility that we don't have as much control over our lives as we believe we do in interviews as he did about the acts themselves. Instead of behaving like a famous actor, he acted as if he understood that this drama was about more than just him. Neo loses, the illusion becomes too thick to break, and the system learns to include resistance. Earlier iterations of The Matrix failed to hold up in testing. In order to increase sales, studio officials insisted on a more simplistic storyline, including a messiah figure and a hero's quest. Thus, some concepts were neglected. The ambiguity was reduced, lines were smoothed, and subplots were cut. The robots become bad guys, the Matrix turned into an app, and the deeper parallels are up to the fans to figure out. However, that caution, it remained. It wasn't about waking up from robots that the red pill was about. It was about waking up from systems that reward obedience and penalize curiosity, from blind habit, from comfort, and from robots in general. The film's impact was not due to its special effects, but rather to the universal message it conveyed. They recognized themselves in it, not the selected one, but the lost one, the ones who stare aimlessly at a computer, questioning whether there is anything beyond what they are being fed. While off-camera, Keanu proclaimed that The Matrix wasn't science fiction. It was the present. The metaphor has come, and the majority of us were already signed in. Even if the studio smoothed up the rough spots, the central idea that we are trapped in a dream we didn't choose has persisted. Perhaps that's why Keanu kept coming back for more. Not because he ached to play Neo, but because he could feel that audiences hadn't really grasped the film's message and hadn't yet woken up. The real tragedy lies behind the fiction. When discussing The Matrix, most people hone in on the film's revolutionary imagery, innovative philosophy, and effects. Not everyone discusses the emotional toll that Keanu Reeves endured before, during, and after filming the scenes involving wire work and martial arts training. Even before Neo's on-screen death, Keanu had endured more heartbreak than the average person could fathom. Even though The Matrix came out in 1999, Keanu was mourning at the time. Jennifer Syme, his business partner, and he had lost their daughter a few months prior. The news of her stillbirth at 8 months devastated them. The two drifted apart. However, they maintained a strong relationship. Jennifer passed away in a vehicle accident less than 2 years after Keanu almost began a family. Still, he continued to turn up. He persisted in his work in a methodical and unassuming manner, seldom attracting notice. Keanu wasn't the sort to be in the news for all the wrong reasons, so nobody knew what he was going through. He allowed it to reside inside him, and it somehow permeated every frame of that film. It makes a different impact when you re-watch The Matrix with this knowledge. Scenes when Neo is disoriented, alone, and uncertain of his role are more than just character moments. They serve as reflections. Keanu was already experiencing that feeling of alone, so there was no need for him to seek it out. After the fact, his co-workers on site recalled that he was intense but reserved, always friendly but emotionally detached. He had come to do the task at hand, not seek fame. Whether he acknowledged it or not, his work served as a kind of self-expression, a release for his sadness, and a conduit for the things he couldn't articulate into something that could have an impact. An underappreciated aspect of Neo is its melancholy. He wins the girl and vanquishes the villains, but even in triumph he feels alone and burdened, as if he knows the truth but is unable to share it with everyone. You can't put a face to that ghostly estrangement. Not that Keanu needed to either. He rethought his approach to fame, roles, and life in general after Jennifer's death. Between films, he vanished. He no longer chased blockbusters. He traveled solo on motorbikes. He strolled across the set, clutching books rather than security. He frequently said, "I'm just passing through," when asked why he avoided the limelight. But it didn't stop him from contributing. Countless anecdotes from Keanu's fan base detail his selfless acts of kindness, such as giving up his train seat, purchasing ice cream for the crew so he could sign a child's receipt, and donating millions to children's hospitals anonymously. He seemed to have concluded that continuing to give parts of himself to other people was the only way to get through all that pain. A peculiar type of therapy, The Matrix became a universe where suffering had meaning and where confusion could be transformed into insight. Rather than a superhero, Neo was just a guy trying to make sense of the world after all he had worked for crumbled. Keanu was there, and he is there. And that's what people felt. They identified with the quiet strength, the melancholy, and the possibility that one may find the will to rise again after losing everything. Even while Keanu never explicitly mentioned his sadness in any of his promotional materials, it was always there. One of the reasons The Matrix was more than simply a good time was that, despite all the slow-motion action and computer code, there was a genuine guy fighting for his life, and he managed to transform his anguish into something enduring. The Matrix had already become a worldwide phenomenon by the time sequel anticipation were through the roof. Fans weren't only anticipating a new film, they were yearning for resolutions. In reality, what is The Matrix? Upon awakening, what transpires? Does the so-called actual world have an existence outside of it? Though they had many grand ideas, the Wachowskis were unable to bring every one of them to fruition. Both Revolutions and The Matrix Reloaded were handled with meticulous care. They were not hurried. Greater action, greater spectacle, and simpler narration were the requirements of the studio's desire for another smash blockbuster. However, it was not the initial plan. There were earlier versions of the sequels that were more riskier, more enigmatic, and philosophical. A different version of the story has Neo learning that the actual world is also a simulation, a controlled revolt, a false sense of freedom, or a safety net for those who don't want to live in the Matrix but still require some kind of structure. Because of the rapid editing and confusing language used in that one scene with the architect, most viewers failed to understand the subplot. Additionally, there were intentions to go into the spiritual aspects of the Matrix. Reincarnation, karmic cycles, and the concept of separation illusion were all concepts that the Wachowskis had included. The original plan was to have Neo and Trinity portrayed as soul-bound individuals who would return time and time again to help awaken others, rather than just as lovers or rebels. However, preliminary tests revealed that such layers were too complex and strange to pass. What was left was still one of a kind, but it was much safer. The sequels toned down the most controversial questions while ramping up the action and chase scenes. They evolved from a frightening reflection of society into something more akin to grand science fiction adventures, with all the same intelligence and style, but without the inherent danger. Because it is not his style, Keanu never openly blasted the alterations. However, in certain interviews, when questioned about the more profound topics, his responses become increasingly brief and evasive, as if he were afraid to say the wrong thing or perhaps couldn't. It was said that he secretly fought to maintain some of the more controversial concepts. Because he cared about the mythology, He tried to stay true to the original style. But even he had to follow the rules at some point. Studio priorities included maintaining brand profitability, not making viewers feel uneasy. That doesn't mean the sequels were a flop. On the contrary, they were daring, innovative, and visually stunning. On the other hand, those hoping for a continuation of the previous film's disturbing themes of control and illusion may have felt like a discussion was broken off too soon. In previous ideas, the conclusion was one of the most significant adjustments. In his last act, Neo wasn't going to ask for a truce, but rather a thorough rejection of the system, Zion, Matrix, and everything in it. He was supposed to reset everything and prove that no structure, not even a revolt, could be trusted. However, that alternative would have provided insufficient clarity and optimism. They altered it since it didn't conform to Hollywood standards. The robots make peace with Neo when he becomes a Christ figure and sacrifices himself. It was tidy, and it ended things. But it wasn't the story's intended conclusion. That must have been annoying for Keanu. Some of the reality that he had dedicated himself to, which was more than simply entertainment, was now being watered down in order to fit into a predetermined mold. Fans of The Matrix continue to argue, even after all these time has passed, over what the sequels may have been and what was omitted from the original. Keanu was silent and faithful throughout, but there was an underlying feeling that he understood something we didn't, that something genuine had been buried behind all the CGI and wirework, and that it wouldn't remain buried indefinitely. One last item to discuss before we go into Keanu's revelations about The Matrix is Neo's return, sometimes known as resurrection or reflection. Reactions to the 2019 announcement of The Matrix Resurrections were varied. While some fans were ecstatic, others were suspicious. Finally, what's the point of reuniting Neo and Trinity? Was there more going on here than just a relaunch for the nostalgia factor? Reviving a franchise was never only about business for Keanu Reeves. It was always about something very personal, and that was the deciding factor. Instead of a boardroom, Lana Wachowski, who hadn't returned with her sister Lily, was the one who came up with the idea for the fourth film. Fan demand or financial opportunity weren't the driving forces behind her return to the Matrix universe. It was her loss. Two of her parents and a close friend had passed away not long ago. Lana has stated in interviews that bringing Neo and Trinity back to life was a coping mechanism for her. She said on how she didn't want to deal with that kind of grief, so I brought them back after the characters died, which resonated with Keanu. After losing his daughter, spouse, and friends, he finally got an opportunity to go back to a place that understood his anguish, a place where real life mattered more than virtual ones. In order to avoid repeating mistakes of the past, he agreed to create a fresh narrative. There was a noticeable change in Keanu from 1999 to this on the press tour. He appeared even more attuned to Neo than previously, despite being older, quieter, and more introverted at the age of 57. He avoided discussing the choreography or costumes when questioned about his experience returning. Instead, he spoke of love, memories, and the weird comfort of returning to something that had never truly left him. Plus, the film itself was completely unexpected. What Resurrections did instead of expanding was dig deeper. It called into question the whole essence of narrative, sequels, and reboots. Instead of a dystopian society populated by agents in leather jackets, it depicted something much more familiar: social media screens, which are disguised as freedom but are actually unending diversions. No longer is Neo the One. He's just Thomas Anderson reincarnated, unable to escape an unexplainably strange reality. He's under continual supervision, given medication, and instructed to disregard his gut feelings. Does this ring a bell? That was the main idea. Combating robots wasn't the film's main focus. Rather, it was battling the delusion that everything is well when, in reality, you know it isn't. Equally potent was Trinity's response. Not only is she Neo's romantic interest, but she is also the catalyst for his awakening, serving as a constant reminder of his true identity. Despite the science fiction elements, the people and actors involved felt genuine passion and raw emotion at their reunion. It was a sense of both letting go and starting over. What really touched home, though, was Keanu's real-life reaction in a promotional interview for the film with Esquire. In his honor, a fan-made memorial video was shown, which featured various segments from his films, as well as behind-the-scenes footage and stories of genuine acts of generosity. Silently, Keanu observed. His eyes filled with tears, he froze for an instant before uttering a single word. "That's wow." It was one of the rare instances where we caught a glimpse of him on video nearly shedding a tear. That was an authentic moment, unscripted and meant to convey more than any interview could have. The Matrix Resurrections wasn't an attempt to carry on a story. Rather, it was a return to an unfinished business. Keanu was able to express himself to Neo, Trinity, the audience, and perhaps even himself in this way. The reunion wasn't a comeback, so much as it was a long-awaited conversation that had been put on hold for 2 decades. Finally, he felt ready to speak the truth, the portion they had forced him to keep hidden. In 2024, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of The Matrix, Keanu Reeves took a seat beside Stephen Colbert. The debate began as lighthearted as most people had anticipated, with perhaps some jokes about bullet time or a montage of nostalgia clips. As Colbert played clips from Keanu's extensive career, the tone gradually changed to The Matrix. When questioned about the film's significance to him now, 25 years after its release, Keanu's expression shifted, his posture altered, and his eyelids drooped. "It altered the course of my existence," he whispered. Following a brief pause, the crowd became silent, which, in my opinion, altered people's perceptions of the world. His delivery seemed more like a guy bearing something he had been waiting years to express than that of a performer recalling. Viewers from home saw right once that Colbert wasn't pushing. What transpired subsequent to the interview further cemented the significance of that event. His friends and family report that following the interview, Keanu was much more forthcoming with his thoughts and feelings, revealing things he had been avoiding discussing for the last 20 years. When Keanu Reeves, at the age of 60, finally admitted in a private discussion the truth about The Matrix, it was a watershed moment. Keanu didn't only hint, he talked openly during the rumored meeting with close associates that had place months following the interview with Colbert. Robots and the future were never his intention with The Matrix. Rather, he saw it as a commentary on our current predicament, ensnared in invisible systems. Next came the unexpected line, "They made me hide this." He said that the studio rejected several sequences from the original script because they were too complicated, confusing, or hazardous. But Neo eventually learns that even the real world is an illusion, a second layer, or another Matrix. According to him, they didn't want people questioning reality like that. They wanted a story they could sell, a hero, a love story, a clear enemy, not something that makes you look at your phone and wonder if you're actually free. Those who heard it interpreted it as tired rather than bitter, like someone who has been holding on to the truth for too long. This made sense as viewers have seen similar peculiarities throughout the years. Unfinished philosophical ideas, early whispers of more extreme conclusions, and Keanu's shyness when asked about the film's deeper significance in interviews. However, he is now expressing it. The Matrix was supposed to wake people up, but the final cut, it just rocked them back to sleep. He allegedly told a close friend this, and he went along with it since he didn't know what else to say at the time. Everything is reframed by one statement alone. No, Neo's purpose was never to save humanity from machines. Rather, he was to serve as a reflection of ourselves, a cautionary tale about how our daily habits, screens, and crafted worlds are as stifling as the virtual jail he fled from. And Keanu, he's been there, done that. Famous, grieving, silent, and free, if only in theory. He carried Neo's position as more than just a persona. He carried it as a message, and he complied with the rules for 25 years. Keanu eventually spoke it aloud at the age of 60. "They made me hide this, but it's always been there. You just have to look closer." And with that, the lie crumbled. Instead of being a plot device, the red pill was a genuine challenge that they never intended for us to fully embrace. It was Keanu, though, and he's passing it on to his son. What aspect of your reality have you confused for freedom now that you've heard Keanu's ultimate confession? That the Matrix was never fiction?